once you're introduced, I'll switch over. I know there's like a first slide.
Check.
You will not need to turn these mics on or on, but they will turn the volume up only when you start using it. Matter of fact, we disabled it. We can try.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this morning's session. I hope you enjoyed Roger Dow and your morning breakouts, and it's great to have you all back in here for the lunch. Like I said, I hope the conference has gotten off to as good a start for you as it has for me. You know, for those of us at Travel Oregon, for all the work that goes into this conference, I will also tell you quite candidly, this is where we're able to come every year and get our batteries recharged. So thank you. There's always so much energy, so much vibrancy, so much passion in this room and throughout the conference, and it's just something that we're all able to just kind of hold on to throughout the year and wait for the next time for us all to get back together at an annual Governor's Tourism Conference. I have the pleasure right now of introducing a very special sponsor. These are folks that we literally work with on a daily basis. They're a critical part of that Oregon experience. And I believe in some ways that's unique to Oregon, because for other destinations, an airport might just be part of transportation infrastructure. But in Oregon, we know that our airport at PDX is part of that Oregon visitor experience. They have intentionally made it a point to be part of that Oregon experience, to showcase Oregon products, to turn their carpet into a celebrity. You know, whatever they can do to help bring some vibrancy to the Oregon tourism industry, they do. And so it's my pleasure right now to bring up, on behalf of the Port of Portland, our sponsor for this afternoon's lunch, David Silky, with the Port of Portland, the Director of Air Service Development. David, please come on up.
Thank you, Todd. Todd and I had a chance to fly back from Mexico City together last Thursday night, and we realized that our first Governor's Tourism Conference was the same one at the Ashland Springs Hotel in 1988. So it was kind of cool to think about that. And I Googled the hotel this morning. There's 70 rooms there. So I thought how much our industry has grown that we could hold a conference at that wonderful resort, but not today. First, before I forget, I do want to acknowledge the panel discussion that's going to be coming up. Teresa's going to be working with. We at the Port, led by our Executive Director, Curtis Robinhold, we are fully engaged in eliminating barriers that have not allowed people of all walks of life in our society to enjoy the benefits and the rewards of what our industry does. And so we are fully supportive and appreciative, and think it's a great opportunity today to be a part of the room here today. I have a lot of great news, so I can't goof this up, I don't think. First thing I want to do is I want to acknowledge the team that I'm part of. I'm biased, but I think that we have the best air service development team in the country. We hear that from airlines, we hear that from consultants. And I want to introduce my team, Rick Aizawa, who does our transoceanic passenger and cargo, Astra Chung, who's our administrative assistant, and Sonia Harvey, who does all of our North America recruiting and retention strategies. And so I just want, how about a round of applause for the Air Service Development team? But we rely on everyone in this room from every corner of the state. Part of our success, part of the numbers that I'm going to share with you, are really a reflection of the fact that the Oregon tourism industry provides world-class attractions that will bring people to Oregon, into PDX and other gateways into the state, and that we also have tremendous partnerships with our industry. And as Todd said, we're absolutely committed to that. I don't think the Port's relationship with the tourism industry, with Travel Oregon, Travel Portland, and many of the stakeholders in this room has ever been stronger, and that's just going to continue as we continue to grow PDX and with the success. We're proud of the fact that we're America's Best Airport 5 years in a row by Condé Nast Travelers, and that's going to continue. We are on the cutting edge of a $2 billion, really a transformational project of what PDX will look like in the next 5 to 7 years, but trust that everything we put into that airport is going to continue to keep it world-class going forward, and you'll be continue to be very proud of what we'd have to offer. So the news is really, really good. We will most likely surpass 20 million passengers in 2018. We are growing roughly at 1 million passengers a year, which is an outstanding number. We've had 5 record years in a row of growth at PDX. Every day there's 6,000 more passengers departing or arriving on flights at PDX, and you can imagine what that means to parking, concession, restaurants, hotels, and obviously your industries as those people get into the state and then move around it. We've grown twice the national average the last 2 years. In 2016, we were the fastest growing large hub in the United States. Internationally, we are closing in on 800,000 passengers, and we were just around 400,000 just 4 years ago. So you can see the success we've had on the international side. We just brought back a delegation from Mexico City. That was a great example of this partnership. We had almost 50 people from Travel Oregon, Travel Portland. Many of you in the room here were with us. We went down there to make sure Mexico knew we are open for business. We are welcoming. We want them to bring their visitors to Oregon. And it was a great example of our partnership. It was really hard getting the landing rights approved. Todd, Jeff Miller were both engaged in helping getting the landing rights approved. Mike Irwin from TSA was involved in that. Governor Brown made a personal call to D.C. Senator Wyden made a personal call to Mr. McAleenan, the head of CBP on a national level. And so it was a great example of the partnership we share. We're now up to 13 international markets, the newest being Mexico City, which we just celebrated last week. We have a cargo service to Hong Kong with Cathay Pacific, and the governor's office was hugely involved in helping us on that as well. So as our consultant likes to say, we punch above our weight, and we're going to keep doing that with the support of everybody in this room. And have a great conference, and thanks for being here.
We are incredibly lucky to have a port authority, as we do with the Port of Portland, working right alongside us as partners in all that we do. I mean, as David mentioned, having 13 flights now that we're able to support. There was a time where, as David will often remind us, that PDX kept international on the front because there was a nonstop daily flight to Vancouver, British Columbia. So you know from whence we came, because for those in the business, you know that wasn't too terribly long ago. And international air service is a fragile, fragile thing, and you've got to work hard to retain that service and make sure that the flight is obviously working both ways. And so we're truly blessed to have a partner, as we do with the Port of Portland, working right alongside all of us in this industry to make sure that Oregon remains this vital and vibrant international destination. You've heard about their growth. You heard a little bit about our growth in the international arena this morning. I will just only add to that as we're seeing overall trips to Oregon increase, the number of folks that are choosing to come to Oregon by air is increasing even more, which means we're doing an even better job at attracting those long-haul destination-oriented visitors, both domestically and internationally, coming into Oregon, and we're able to do that because of the partnerships. One of the other partnerships that we often associate with the Port of Portland, although they provide services really throughout the state of Oregon, and David called out Mike Irwin with the TSA. But I would be remiss if I did not, since they are here in the room with us today at lunch, acknowledge the leadership of the Transportation Security Administration here in Oregon. You know, say what you will, read what you will about federal government security and lines at airports and whatever else. I want you folks in this room to understand how incredibly lucky we are to have the team that we have here in Oregon. Because to have an Oregon Federal Security Director like we have in Mike Irwin is a gift. Because when you hear Mike speak about the role of TSA, he says things like, we are part of the Oregon experience. We are going to be that last impression they have of their Oregon vacation experience. My friends, when was the last time you heard a federal agency authority speak that way about their role? Because they are first and foremost about security. but they understand that it's not only personal security, national security in that regard, but it's also economic security, and that they have a role to play in that as well. So Mike Irwin is here, Tina Burke, who's the Assistant Federal Security Director, are both here in the room. Would you both stand, because you deserve a round of applause and our thanks and gratitude. Thank you. My friends, it is now my great pleasure to bring up our moderator for this afternoon's lunch session, Travel Oregon's VP for Global Strategic Partnerships, someone I've had the pleasure of working with for, 13 years at Travel Oregon, but she and I first met back in 1994 when she was at the Hilton and I was just hired as the International Program Manager for Travel Oregon. So would you please welcome to the stage our VP for Global Strategic Partnerships at Travel Oregon, Teresa O'Neill. Teresa, come on up.
Hello, thanks everyone, and Todd, thanks for that nice introduction, and David, thank you. We are so grateful the Port of Portland is sponsoring today's lunch in particular, and so grateful that another state agency is aligned with us on such an important topic. And so I really don't want to take up much time because the panel is just amazing. And first I'll talk a little bit about Michael, who this panel and preparing for it has really been just a great journey. And Michael and I had the opportunity to talk a lot about my past experiences over the last 30 years in the industry, and he had asked me to share a personal experience, possibly relating to today's topic about gender equity and traveling Oregon safely. And I thought, and I got to be honest, I have probably quite a few #MeToo experiences I could share with you all today. I'm not happy about saying that, and I actually am not minimizing that movement in any way, shape, or form, because I think those people that are telling those stories have great courage. I decided not to focus on the past today because I found it more empowering to get up here today and talk about this conversation about diversity. And this conversation was started last year with Michael when Mo brought him in, and I thought how wonderful that we started a conversation last year. And now we're going to continue it around this topic around gender equity, race, and different identities. And I'm so proud that Travel Oregon supports this conversation, and I hope that many of you are as well, because it's one that we really need to have. And with that, I want to introduce our facilitator, who will introduce our great panel. Michael Hulshoff-Schmidt is the Executive Director of Equality Works Northwest, and he's just a very nice, kind man, and I've enjoyed working with him, and I hope you all enjoy listening to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Carol, Ashley, and thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone from Travel Oregon, for y'all are absolutely amazing, and none of this work could be done without you all, so thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to make sure that we're staying on time, and I want to make sure we have a lot of space for this amazing, phenomenal panel of human beings whom I just love and adore. And we only have, I think, until 5:15 this evening. So
We'll make it quick.
Today, you're going to hear from our panel around gender, but we're also going to talk about what does it mean to travel in Oregon, and what does it mean to think about safety and our own safety, especially if you're from a targeted identity. So if you're a person of color and you're traveling through Oregon, or if you're a queer person, or a gay, lesbian person, or trans-identified person, what does that look like for you as you're traveling through Oregon? I will just share, recently, my husband and I were traveling in Oregon, and we went to a hotel, and upon checking in, this young person looked at me and then looked at my husband and said, "Oh, so you'll need 2 rooms." I said, "No, actually, when my husband and I travel together, we like to stay in the same room." And she goes, "So you'll stay in the same room together?" Yeah, and I thought, ooh. Y'all don't make me take my earrings out. And I said, yes, that's right. We're going to stay in the same room together. And I said, would you have asked that question of a heterosexual couple? And she said, no. I said, that's problematic. Fortunately, the manager of the front desk overheard that conversation and interceded. I asked that manager, I said, thank you, first of all, for coming to do repair work. Secondly, please do not blame or shame that person, but could you please ask her to do things differently? Why I share this with you and why I want you to hear from this amazing panel is because Travel Oregon is huge. The travel industry in Oregon is huge. And you're going to end up hurting yourself economically if you are putting barriers in front of people from traveling, specifically people from targeted identities, people who are queer, people of color. So can we please pay attention to that? Just Crater Lake, summer snow. I love Crater Lake. And it was 96 degrees that day, and look at the snow. Is that totally cool? And who is that beautifully handsome millennial standing there? Oh, it's me. That wasn't funny, actually. So it's a hostile group, Teresa. You know, they were hostile last year, too. The jealousy of my youth and my beauty. Did you all just hear Maria just laugh at me? So for those of you that are in the travel industry, all of you in this room, I'm hoping you are constantly thinking about intersecting identities. That when people are coming to your parks, to your restaurants, to your hotels, to your wineries, to your breweries, you are constantly thinking about race. You're constantly thinking about sexual orientation, about someone's ability, or their disability, if they have one, invisible or visible, about their age, about their gender or gender identity, about their culture. Are they coming from rural areas or urban areas? What level of education do they have? Can you hold on to all of that tension all at the same time to make sure that all of these people with different intersecting identities feel safe, invited, and welcome at your establishment, regardless of where you are in Oregon? Make sure that you are welcoming everyone. What you do not want to happen is to have someone have a bad experience with a targeted identity, and social media, it catches on fire. You don't want someone to say, that was a very homophobic, racist winery or a hotel or a restaurant, because that catches on fire. And then it's hard to do repair work after that. I would like to introduce this amazing, amazing panel. And they're going to share with you some of their story, and then we're going to leave time for questions and answers. So first, I'd like to introduce Maria Ponzi. She is the president and CEO of Ponzi Winery. I'd also like to introduce Al Munguia, who is the general manager of the Jupiter Hotel. And I'd also like to introduce the lovely and amazing Tamara Kennedy Hill, who is with Travel. And Maria, are you comfortable sharing a little bit about your background and are you traveling in Oregon and
Sure.
your winery?
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. So wonderful to be here. I'm a true Oregonian. I'm like all of you. I treasure this state, and I always feel so honored to invite guests to our winery, which is just outside of Portland. So I'm with you on this. Thank you, Michael, for having me on the panel. I wasn't really sure if I was appropriate for the panel, but as I got to know Michael more and we had some really interesting discussions, I realized how this idea really needs to get out more to, I think, some of us who may sit as I sit as, what are my labels? Can you give me my labels? I have a lot of labels to me. Who am I?
Well, you certainly, as we've gotten to know each other, are a white, heterosexual, cisgender, able-bodied woman.
See? I had no idea. I sat down and he told me that. I was like, wow, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But I did realize that, this idea of all of those things make me somewhat privileged. But I am a woman, and there are things that come up on a daily basis that I think some of us who share the same labels maybe we're not so aware of all the time. So it was a really interesting conversation. Anyway, yes, I'm the daughter of Nancy Ponzi, who is sitting in front of me. My mother, who is the founder of one of Oregon's first wineries and also the founder of the first craft brewing operation in Oregon, and so I have great roots. I have a powerful woman who has led me along the way. But so I've been president of the winery for a long time, it seems. My sister and I now own the operation, so it is sister-owned, which of course is female-owned, which comes with a whole lot of interesting things. But I had learned early on when I started in the industry that I was in a male-dominated business, and I didn't really understand that because, of course, I grew up as a young girl in the wine industry, and I was just a farm kid, and we just did what we did. But it was a trip that I made. One of the first sales trips I had was in New York City, and I wore, a dress that was probably at the knee and heels. I like heels. And so I went in and I was trying to sell wine, and I realized that I was getting zero attention. Nobody was paying attention to me, even though I had something to tell them. I had this really special place in Oregon. We were growing great Pinot Noir. And I realized that I was being perceived, first of all, as a young woman, and I wasn't taken seriously. So I immediately flipped over to wearing pants and jackets. And then I got a little bit more attention. And as I'm moving through the wine industry these days, I have looked at my counterparts who are mainly men, and they're wearing jeans and in some cases a white T-shirt, nothing printed on it, by the way. I mean, just a white T-shirt and maybe some, sneakers. In some cases, if we're in Florida, flip-flops. And I think, I wonder how that works. Like, I don't think I could ever pull that off. So there are things like that happen on a regular basis that I kind of check myself and say, I just don't think I could still pull that off. And I just want you also to know, in terms of the alcohol industry, that in California, we don't have stats in Oregon yet, but in California, there are only 10% of their winemakers are female winemakers in California, and only 4% of those women are CEOs and owners of wineries, whereas there are 48% men that are owners and also winemakers. So it's quite apparent. In Oregon, I think, fortunately, we're a little bit more progressive, perhaps. Louisa, my sister, is one of the winemakers, but I think we're closer to about 20% women winemakers, and several CEOs, actually, that are now in place that are women. So we're trending properly anyway. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll share more.
Maria, thank you. I so appreciate when you talked about, and this happened when you and I first met, we were talking about the different identities Maria holds and all those intersecting identities of being white, of being female, of being cisgender and able-bodied. And the first thing Maria said, she goes, I have a lot of privilege because I have those identities. And I thought, wow, I love your self-awareness. Because we talked about that she gets to navigate in ways that other people can't navigate, especially while traveling through Oregon. And it made me want to become closer to her because she was very candid about that. And I want to hear from Al, when you think about traveling through Oregon as a gay man of color, what does that look like for you? Do you feel safe? Are there places that you might not feel safe?
I was recently asked that question, and I thought about it very quickly, and my initial response was, no, I feel safe everywhere in Oregon because I know how to act. And those very words of me uttering them, of I know how to act, really started my own thought process going, what does that mean? And one of the things I realized is that my entire life, I've always been the odd guy out. I was the Spanish kid in school. I was the fat kid in school. I was the gay kid in school. And in school, they don't use the words gay. They just use the word fag. So I was the fag in school. And that helped me understand really quickly that I was not part of the group. So I had to learn to maneuver how do I insert myself into the group? How do I maneuver within these groups of people? And so in being asked that question, I started realizing that my life has been one of constant awareness of who I am and how I project. My voice inflection, my hand movements, the way I sit. Do I cross my legs this way? Do I cross my legs this way, which looks more manly? And it's a constant thought process. So to answer the question, where do I feel, have I felt unsafe? I have not, because I've been, again, consciously just maneuvering within a certain rules that I think I need to in order to not stand out. But it was an interesting conversation because that really caused me to start thinking, and really for the first time in 55 years, soon to be 56, caused me to think of who I am and how I present. And one of the challenges, I'll be honest with you, now I'm going to let go now. Now that I'm comfortable, I'll tell you everything now. One of the biggest challenges that I've always had personally is this feeling of not being seen, of being very lost in the background. And the question got me thinking that the reason for that is that I don't feel I was ever my authentic self with most people. I presented just parts of me that they needed to be able to see in order to maneuver that particular situation. So it's been a very interesting process for me in coming to that realization that there's a lot of self-editing and a lot of restraint going on. And so in the last couple of weeks, this has been a very interesting thing for me. It's really been about trying to live my life a lot more authentically and being less concerned about the way you may feel about me versus the way I choose to project who I am. So that's sort of been my interesting little story for the last couple of weeks. But to answer your question, yeah, at this point, I think that Oregon is a very welcoming place. But like you, there have been several situations where I know that I have to be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more aware. If I go to eat in a small town, if I'm on a date, I make sure not to sit at the same side of the table. It's about image, it's about projection, it's about how I'm going to be perceived or judged in that situation. So,
Al, thank you. And I also wanted to touch on Maria shared with us, it is a very male-dominated field, and you and your sister own this winery. And so two things I'm going to ask if you don't mind sharing. You shared with me a story about when your husband accompanies you. And Al, after Maria shares that, would you mind sharing the story about what you're doing specifically as the general manager of the Jupiter, how you're leveraging your own power around women of color?
Yeah, and I'm sure that this has happened to many people. I don't know. It's so common for me that I feel like it happens all the time, but I do tastings all the time, all over the country. Occasionally, my husband, occasionally if I'm in Oregon hosting a tasting, he'll come with me. He's an architect. He has his own build design firm. He knows nothing of wine, really nothing. I think it was kind of why he was attracted to me, because it was like, wow. Because I don't care about wine. I personally don't care about wine. I love wine, but I'm not like, I don't live and die by wine. And so he was sort of like, that's cool. I can hang out with her and we can just drink wine and have fun. Anyway, point is, you don't have to analyze it. Just so the people in the wine, you have to analyze wine. It gets really boring. So when I'm at a tasting and my husband's standing next to me and his name tag says Brett Fogelstrom and mine says Anna Maria Ponzi, and the wine on the table says Ponzi Vineyards, and they ask him about how harvest is going this year. Brett goes, I actually don't have a clue. Are we in harvest? Oh, Maria, could you explain harvest? And this happens over and over and over again, and it never ceases to amaze me because his name is obviously not on the bottle, yet mine is. It doesn't get easier than that. But this happens often. My mother and I often talk about how Dick Ponzi, my father, her husband, is often known as the founder of the winery. And I don't know where my mother was, but last time I checked, she was right there, alongside, planting the vineyard, pruning, selling wine. But for some reason, she seems to get forgotten in the story. And this is sort of these things, and I know some of you can probably relate to this. You get used to this kind of thing. You just kind of, you shrug it off. You go, ha, ha, ha. It's a funny little story. Happens over and over again. But it is something that you go to bed with, and you go, that sort of bothers me. Why does this keep happening?
And that speaks to the harm that gets done specifically to women and to people of color and to people who have targeted identities. Teresa started us off today, and Teresa is just moving forward. But I hope you don't mind. Teresa has shared with me some of the harm that she's encountered in her lifetime, all 30 years of her. I think you're 31 this year. And I think what happens is if we don't acknowledge that there's been harm done, we can't repair the system. We can't even change the system until we acknowledge that harm is being done. Someone who is now changing part of how the system works is Al. And do you mind talking about how you're actually changing part of the system?
Yes. Well, a couple of years ago, I had a night audit position available, and I had a housekeeper who is bilingual. Now, one thing you have to understand is I grew up in accents. I grew up in a Spanish household, so accents are just a natural part of my life. They all sound very clear to me. But anyway, so we approached her and said, "Are you interested in this position?" And her response was, "No, I speak with an accent. I'm a housekeeper. That's my role. That's my life." And it just got me thinking that here I have this huge group of people that are hardworking, intelligent, have much to offer, yet we haven't created an avenue for them to be able to express that. And it got me thinking that even when I had housekeeping positions available, no internal candidates would apply. So I started asking, trying to figure out what is the cause here, and realized that it is this perception that we are not on the same playing field as you, so therefore we just are not going to try to go for these positions. So understanding that language and the perception of language was a barrier, we offered English-speaking classes to all Spanish speakers, and then Spanish-speaking classes to all English speakers. The classes happen once a week. They're 2 hours. The employees are paid for attending, totally voluntary. The Spanish classes, the English-speaking classes, for example, are every Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock, 8 to 10. I have a group of 12 housekeepers that attend them. And what I saw immediately happen was that the Spanish speakers, those that were learning Spanish were now attempting to speak Spanish with the housekeepers, and the housekeepers who are Spanish speaking were now attempting to speak English. And so for a quick minute there, if you will, the playing field was completely leveled, where everybody was on that same position of not being embarrassed by the wrong use of a word or by an accent, because those who spoke English had just as bad Spanish accents as those who spoke Spanish had just as bad as English accents. But that was all gone. And so the most interesting thing is that now, of course, that we have the new building, which is opening up very, very soon, we've posted positions for supervisors in the housekeeping department, and I have 6 internal applicants, which is something that just had not happened in the history up until being able to give people the opportunity to see that they are more than what they are currently doing, and that there is far more value and potential to them than just what they have been given at this moment, as their lot, if you will.
Speaking of change and trying to change how systems have access or don't have access or create barriers, Tamara is actually working systemically and systematically with Travel Portland to remove barriers. Before we get to that, Tamara, do you mind sharing with everyone, what is your experience as a woman of color when you're traveling through Oregon?
Sure. It's interesting when you ask that question, which is a pretty, someone who loves the travel industry and who's been transformed by the industry, and who's traveled different parts of the world and has been connected to community. my first reaction was the opposite of yours, Al. I said, when you asked me, do I feel safe traveling all parts of Oregon, I said, absolutely not. And that was my initial reaction. And then I had to break it down and go, well, why is that? I'm a systems thinker. What's going on with that? What is the perspective? And as Al and Maria both had talked about it, you sometimes get so used to adapting to dominant culture that you're not even aware of how much effort and energy that takes. And I recognize that I am an African American, a light-skinned African American, so I have privilege within my own community based on that. But I also have that creates lots of connotations and tension within community and within dominant culture because people don't know which box to put you in. So I'm going to share my story so that I can let you know, but no, you cannot ask that normally of someone. So for the purpose of this discussion, I'm letting you know that I'm the youngest of 6 people. My parents, both my parents are African American. My mother was very light-skinned. I'm also part Native American. I wanted to talk about my story in context to what was happening in the country, as well as in Oregon and in Portland, because I think it's really important to understand the past and the past of place and the policies that have been in place that are impacting your community so that you can understand how to appropriately heal from that if you are an establishment that's wanting to be welcoming, so that you can understand the tension points, you can understand the movements that we're in right now. We're in a really exciting time as a nation and also a really divisive time, and those tensions are both reality. And so we have an opportunity to choose to unite and connect, and we are the industry that really is meant for that. We're the industry that, from travel, we really believe that it can break down barriers, and we can open up doors, and we can be changed. So I truly believe that. And we also know we happen to live here in Oregon, which is an amazing place, and we're connected by so much with land and place and food. This is another opportunity for us to be connected and to tell a different narrative. So many of you know, or maybe you don't know, that from 1917 to 1970 is called the Great Migration. And that was 60 years of 6 million African Americans migrating from the south to the north and to the west. And for new opportunities to change a really tragic time in our history and to heal and to grow. And many of these families came in looking for something completely new and had to leave all behind. And so they became, while they were citizens, they did not actually have the same rights as other citizens. So while most of the country was telling everyone, go and settle and take land, in Oregon, which Oregon was actually against slavery, was also against black people. So, there was 2 different tension points where it was a very open door for white settlers to come in and take land. It was very not okay for black people to come to Portland and to Oregon. And so I say that as those were the histories not even that long ago that many of these policies and laws were still in place. And they still impact many of our communities today. And so we have to understand that so we can understand why communities of color may not feel comfortable if they don't know how you are addressing that past and historical place. So we, as in the travel industry, have an obligation to tell authentic messages about place, but then also to connect with community and be able to work on healing and making sure that all of our doors are welcoming and inclusive. So my family moved, my parents met in Detroit, and then they moved to, they were born in the South and they met in Detroit, but then they moved to Southern California, and then they moved to Portland in the early 70s, and I was born in mid-70s, and then we moved from Portland for a variety of reasons because it wasn't actually the best experience for them at the time. There was a lot of redlining. African Americans could only live in a certain area. It wasn't a very welcoming place for my family. And so we moved on. We moved on to Alaska, and I think that was the great frontier, and I think I'm really grateful that I grew up there, but I chose as an adult to come back to Portland because I also loved the place, and I still love it. But it was very interesting how progressive our city is in so many ways, and leaders in so many things. And this space, it's uncomfortable. And Oregonians are nice, and they don't like to be uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable conversation. So you have to raise this as an issue because I truly believe the only way we'll continue to grow and heal is if we acknowledge what's not okay. And we acknowledge that we didn't all start off in the same place, so we can't all have the same future unless we acknowledge that there's gaps and there's disparity. And so what are we doing to address those inequities? And I think that's something I'm very passionate about, something I'm very excited about, something I'm very hopeful about that we can do well in Oregon.
And I want to... I'm feeling very compelled to say a huge thank you, because I feel when you share that, it honors all of us. And I also want to make sure that I asked permission first to ask Tamara to speak, and Al and Maria. I'm inviting us not to ask people of color to tell their narrative, because that means they have an enormous amount of disproportionate labor to do. We can learn on our own. We don't have to put that labor on people of color or on targeted identities. I asked her permission, and I want to say a huge thank you. But I also think it's worth digging a little deeper here. Oregon calls itself the first slave-free state, which is really misleading at best. I envisioned it initially when I heard, oh, Oregon was a slave-free state, as this is where all the abolitionists moved. No. It was against the law for people who are African American to live in the state of Oregon. It was against the law until 1926. How many of you knew that? A few of you. So that history has a way of living, because if the law is that you're not even allowed to live in the state, you're not allowed to exist in the same space as white people, that's pretty profound. And Tamara mentioned redlining, which we know went on through the 1980s. That's pretty hard to digest. When we totally displaced communities of color because they weren't allowed to live there. How many of you knew that it was not until 1988 that women could actually have a business loan in their own name? A couple of you. Okay, great. Nancy, your mom knew. So women had to have their husband or father or son sign off for a business loan for them up until 1988. I was 3 years old then. The people that were laughing, I saw you. You'll be ejected from the audience. I think why it's important to know all of this is because that history informs how people normalize behavior, and how the state of Oregon normalizes behavior about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And if we don't acknowledge the harm that has been done to targeted communities, we cannot change that system. And this is a beautiful segue into the work that Tamara's actually doing about changing the system at Travel Portland. Do you mind talking a little bit about what the work that you're doing?
Sure, and I'm so fortunate that, again, it's not me. It's Travel Portland has allowed for the opportunity to push the envelope in this space and to really go deeper. I have an amazing team that inspires me and helps us make sure that we're doing this very intentionally and authentically. And so one of the things that we know, if anyone that knows Travel Portland knows that we do really well, everything we do externally to the world, marketing campaigns, we just knock it out of the park. I mean, I'm just very proud of all of the team, everything they do. And yet we realized that internally we had some work to do around culture, and we had a lot of really good insights and also leadership support. Jeff Miller is amazing support about this, but it's just those little subtle things that you're not even aware that you have continued to allow to happen. And I am guilty of supporting that. And so I'm realizing the structural things we needed to change. I needed to also realize that I'm enough. And so I'm sharing this because it's just this recent epiphany. At 44, I'm like, you know what? I'm enough, and I have something to offer here. And I'm a systems thinker, and I overwhelm people, but that's okay. I can break it down. But what the context to that and to the equity work is, we realize is that, we can't just put on unconscious bias training if we hadn't really talked about the context. We had to really talk about this is from our customers. We want to be seen as a welcoming, inclusive place, and we were doing this really well, but we needed to have the relationships within community. And Portland had not necessarily a really great narrative in the national media, and that was a big challenge, is how do we get over this narrative of being the whitest big city in the country? Is that true? Is that doing a service to our industry, to all the communities of color in Portland and throughout the state? And so we took a really thoughtful approach to this, was, starting small and really kind of connecting with community, telling marketing campaigns, just telling that story. We also realized we had to start with our own staff and see that there was a lot of fear. And it was fear of doing the wrong thing. It wasn't fear because there wasn't deep care. It was a fear of I don't want to offend. So then it was you know what? People actually are really nice, and let's just have conversation. Let's just connect. And so we did some really intentional outreach and connected with all the different community organizations and make sure that we were listening to them. It wasn't about us coming in and fixing or us doing something for them. It was, how do you want to be represented? How can we help tell your story? Do we have the permission to tell your story? Can we work together? And over time, and through different intentional ways of connecting entrepreneurs of color to the travel industry, hearing the stories, making sure that our corporate giving the first thing we did was make sure that of all of our corporate giving, 50% was going to communities of color, and that we're being very intentional. We had a relationship with every one of those organizations to say, we care about you, we want to invest in you. I hope that you care about our industry. We hope that we can hire from you. So try to build that pipeline, trying to build those relationships. With that intentional investment and connection opened up doors. And so we worked with our economic development organization, Prosper Portland, which has its own challenging history. And they're also working on building trust, formerly the Development Commission that was responsible for a lot of those redlining. They also were working to help support entrepreneurs of color scale and grow. And so I said, what do we do really well? We market and we storytell and we connect. That's what we do well. And they do really well is doing business development. So we said, what if we made an event and we connected these entrepreneurs of color for professionals of color in our region so that they don't leave anymore, that they can find community. And we open up the doors for everyone and we do a celebration. What if we just start with a celebration of cultural diversity and a marketplace? So it's combining economics, it's combining access and opportunity, and it's combining community. And we could do that with really intentional collaboration. And I have to give a big shout out to Michelle Comer, our team, who really made it all come together. And she said, what if we brought in this artist group that does X, Y, Z? I'm like, what? I don't know. But you need really inspiring people who push you, and you give them that space for that. And what if we also first do it for our staff? And we realize we can't do this for publicly until we actually make it easy for our staff to overcome that says, I don't want to hear you can't source from, or you can't find, or I don't know. So I said, okay, if that's what's coming up, it's because they're not connected. So let's make it easy for them. Let's do the hard work. Let's build those relationships. Let's find really quality vendors and connect them. And then we can push accountability. But first we have to get connected. Let's have a meal with other people. Let's celebrate. Let's connect. Let's have fun. Let's learn. And from there, we've had some really amazing, transformative experiences that people are like, that's associated with Travel Portland. We said, yes, because this is about Portland, and this is about the future of our city. So I kind of went off, but hopefully that helps, because it's really exciting that we were able to do these marketplace celebrations. And the whole point of that was to connect forth our sales team so that when they were pitching to a diverse convention, that they wouldn't say, you have black people there? Why would I want to come there? We could say yes, and we have professionals, and we have artists, and we have all these things, but we first needed to connect, and we needed to have fun and then celebrate and support, and then we needed to connect those to our national and international markets, because they're part of the Oregon story, and they're part of the Portland story, but it's an awareness piece. So it's a lot of education awareness to say we have a history, as it's every place in the United States and probably around the world, and we're going to know that story, and we're also going to tell a different story in the future.
Thank you. Before we open up to take questions from you all, what I'm going to invite is, can all of us in this room commit to believing people's narratives? Even if it's not within your experience, can you believe people? So if someone says, you know what, I felt like I was being treated differently at your restaurant because of my race, can we believe that person and then offer repair work? Can we believe someone who says, that felt really sexist to me, and I don't feel like you would treat a man in the same way? Can we believe people? that belief and affirmation, then offer of repair work, is what allows us to move forward. And then what I heard Tamara say is, how do we then tap into some shared humanity? We can't tap into shared humanity if we don't acknowledge that harm was done and is being done. I'd like to open it up to questions. Are you all comfortable taking some questions? And I think we're going to have 2 microphones passing around. So if you would like to ask a question, could you also share your first name and what part of Oregon are you from?
I'll hand this right back to Tamara. Just a few weeks ago, you shared with me the story about a conference that you put on in Portland for some executive women in leadership. And would you just talk a little bit about that and why you did it?
Thank you. This is why I'm now so empowered and transformed. This is the best experience ever. So a shout out to our sales team. They have been in the spirit of innovation and collaboration. We have an office in Chicago. And they wanted to say, what's our role in this conversation? And for them, it was a great partnership with an organization called Association Forum, which is an umbrella association of association executives based in Chicago. So we thought, well, what if we could connect with leaders in a different city, invite them to Portland to have this immersive experience, and then connect them with other Portland female leaders and have this really transformative experience. And so we did that, but we did it in a way that we didn't even know we were really going to be transformed. It was called a Women's Executive Leadership Forum, and it did. It brought 12 CEOs from Chicago, and we connected them with female leaders here in Portland. But what's so amazing about was that it wasn't anti-men, just when we say women's empowerment, it's not anti-men. It really was about going deeper about those limiting beliefs that happen in systems that we weren't even aware of, and calling it out. And so one of my favorite aspects of this was, we had to learn that you have to call out those habits that damage trust, and there's another name for that I'll tell you later after stage. But habits that damage trust in organizations, we're all guilty of that, and you have to call it out. You have to name it to tame it. So if you continue to allow some of these horrible things like sexism, or even other things like avoiding conflict and lots of different things that actually don't allow you to move forward as a culture, then there's so many people that you're pushing aside. And so we left that saying, you know what, now I'm empowered, I'm in a position of power, and I have team members who are all women, and so how am I creating space for them to also feel empowered? How do I challenge things that are actually not, when we are told that you maybe aren't acknowledged because you're female because of the way you look, when you know you have the right information, knowledge, experience, how do you call that out in a way that isn't harming someone else? And so which is really interesting right now, I think probably a lot of men are feeling uncomfortable, but this is okay because we need you too. You need to speak up for others because you have that position of power, and we need you in our circle of trust. But you need to create space and hear and listen when someone says, when you did X, Y, and Z, or you said it this way, it actually made this half of the room feel like they weren't included. I'm sure you didn't mean to do that. What can we do differently moving forward? So we have to be able to step into that. And any woman here that is a woman in position, you need to step into that, but we do it from a place of deep connection and not from a place of shame. So deep connection, if you truly are connected, then you can call out things that are not okay in a way that allows that person to grow. Because you're seeing their humanity and you're helping them get into the proper frame of mind. Because if we come from a place of fear or anger or other, that's in our lower part of our brain, and that puts up walls, and there's no way we can be inclusive. But if we tap into their higher self, we can relate and we can connect. And if we put positive energy toward that, then we can actually shift and we can actually do better work. It's still a lot of work to be done. Women make up more than 40% of the workforce, but only 5% are CEOs. So kudos to you, Maria. So you have a lot of on your shoulders.
Well, I think there's a lot there, and I think that that just being aware of these things is half of it. We had an incident recently in the tasting room where a group of colored people came in, and unfortunately they felt offended at the bar. And it astounded me, right? Because I take for granted that we are welcoming and open and all these things. I know that, but unfortunately I failed in passing that culture, that same philosophy on to my team. And, it was unfortunate that happened. It was a simple, and some of these things are very simple, where a menu was put at the bar table, and the server took it away and gave it to somebody else, and that person felt offended by that. It was a colored person who felt offended by that. And we took it back as a team meeting. We got together and talked about it. It was a big deal. As Michael's saying, gosh, you got the social media to always, it's always there, right? So we discussed, but it gave us an opportunity to talk about this. And I realized that these are things that I'm not thinking of them. And so it was an opportunity to have a very open conversation with my team and say, hey, you got to be aware of this. Are you not aware of this? And I think as women leaders, the reason I bring this up now is I think as women leaders, we have a responsibility to do what I think is hopefully natural for many of us, and that is to work together and to share together and to collaborate together and be open and transparent. And these are the things that I've realized in working with men and women both. But it's something that I see that women really have a gift to do if they choose to in leadership positions. And so I just, I pass that on to all of you to consider if it's something that you just believe that, you take for granted that it's happening in your front, your guest interactions. Perhaps it's not, and be proactive about it. Do it before you get killed by social media and it goes crazy and you try to bring things back under control. So just a thought.
And I want to say a huge thank you, because that was a huge amount of vulnerability taken and assumed by Maria. So thank you. And what I loved when she told that story to me a few months ago, it speaks to my invitation for all of us around intent versus impact. Does our intent align with our impact? That's a lot of reflection for all of us to do. Because if the impact doesn't align with your intent, you have to address the impact. And that's what I heard Maria do. A person of color was at her winery at the tasting room and experienced harm. And Maria, rather than saying, can you prove it, I don't think it was racism, because that's pretty harmful in and of itself. You believe the person and then offered repair work, because that's an acknowledgement that my intent didn't align with the impact. It's always interesting to me when I hear white folk saying to people of color, maybe it wasn't racism, maybe you're being overly sensitive, maybe you're just looking at it. For me, it's like the pizza thing. It's like, if I have pizza and someone says, are you sure it's pizza? Can you prove that it's pizza? How do you know it's pizza? Well, I know it's pizza, right? So when people of color say, I'm experiencing harm and it's around race, what would it be like for us to say, that wasn't my intent, but I sure do hear that's the impact. What do you need for me to move forward? What do you need as far as repair work? And we already know the travel industry in Oregon, there are lots of places in parts of Oregon that may not feel safe for people of color to travel to. So again, coming back to those intersecting identities, how can we anticipate, how do we make it comfortable for people with different held identities than ours? Is this a safe place for people who identify as gender fluid? Is it a place that's comfortable for transgender folk, for trans people of color? And if it's not, how do I change the culture at my restaurant or wherever I'm at to make sure that people do feel safe and do feel welcome? Are there other questions that I think we have a great panel, other questions that people may want to ask?
Got one over here.
So I have a question. So you were talking about maybe not always feeling safe going to some of our smaller rural communities here in Oregon. I live in a small rural community in Oregon. I bring people from all over the country and around the world to my location, but there are other places for people to go and shop. So what do you all recommend for those places that are not that friendly because it's a very conservative small town?
I would say if you are a place where people from all cultures are welcome, put that publicly noted in your window and put all are welcome and note who is welcome there. So then those communities can see and make sure that you have the training to back that up on your teams. So then that they know which places are safe for them to go to, and they will share amongst themselves and pass that along. And if possible, if you have influence in your community, can you have conversations and forums and learnings for your community so that people can understand the economic potential loss that they're having by not allowing all to feel welcome in their place? That maybe there's some things that they can learn about other cultures that they weren't aware of that they would actually be enlightened by. So could you kind of take it away to be a change maker within your own community by showing and highlighting how much success you're having with these amazing international visitors that are coming to your place of business?
Absolutely. I love that because it's about building relationship and building community. What was your first name? I'm sorry. Scotty? Hi, Scotty. I'm Michael. So I think part of building relationship and building community is do it here right now. Talk to each other. Talk to us. Talk to other people who you don't know in rural parts and start building community. Where are you from in Oregon? Outside of Corvallis, yeah. Yeah. So I think what we do is we build community and then we share those narratives and share those stories. I was invited to go to Ontario, Oregon last spring. Is anyone here from Ontario? Yeah. Great. Both of you are here. That's lovely. And I was extremely anxious. They said, could you please come and talk about LGBT issues in Ontario? And I was really terrified because this is a lot of fabulous to drive up to Ontario. And I was really nervous. It is. It's a lot of fabulousness. And to my surprise and my great enjoyment, it was a wonderful community that embraced me with open arms. And it's a huge community of color there. 75% of the audience identified as Latinx, as Latino. And so when we say that there are no people of color in certain areas, that's actually not true. It's do they have access, do they feel welcome, or are there so many barriers that they don't feel safe being seen? Other questions?
Yeah, I have one over here.
And your first name and where are you from?
Yeah, my first name is Matthew. I'm from the Portland region. I wanted to ask how white heterosexual males can be allies in this movement.
Brilliant.
This is very interesting because the majority of my friends happen to be white heterosexual males, and I think that what you can do is just be aware that my life experience is different than yours, and be inquisitive just as I am about your life. Feel free to be inquisitive about mine. It's funny because recently I did have lunch with a group of friends, and I found that I'm an observer as opposed to a participant many times when I'm with these groups. Because again, I don't feel that my story necessarily aligns with theirs because their experiences are different. But recently just found myself, and again, after this sort of shift in how I edit, I found myself being very honest and open and engaged in conversations and sharing about my experience. One of the things I did not mention earlier is I'm a widow of 6 years, and many people don't even know that because it's not something I talk about. But I was able to share. So it was just an interesting dynamic to finally be able to be open and just talk about my life.
I wanted to just jump in a bit. Because my son is, he's a white, privileged, cute little boy. Well, whatever. He's 20 now, but the point is, he's great. But he had the opportunity to attend Catlin Gable School in Portland. It's a private school. It's very liberal, very progressive school. And at that school, they have a diversity week where they talk about all these things that we're discussing here today. And in that school, there's often kids that are transitioning. It's high school. Kids are developing, figuring out that they're homosexual, they're bi, whatever their issues might be. And that community is so open to these kinds of people. And what I wanted to say, my son came home one day and he said, Mom, I walk in this room and everybody's, they're all feminists and they're all transitioning and we got to change, Joe's name's now Jessica and Jessica's Joe. And he said, I walk in there and I just feel like I'm defeated from the moment I walk in the door because I'm this white blonde guy, who's been able to go to private school. And I said, that's just it. You have a responsibility. You're the guy. You've got to show everybody else how to act. And I think that is something that you asked about, this situation, what can men do? And I think that you're there to help everybody else and lead them in the right direction. And that is something that's on you. And it's also on me, as, again, all the things that he called me. It's on me to provide an open place and keep teaching people how to treat each other.
Can I make one comment? Thank you. I was just going to say, building on Maria and Al's comments, so women still make 80 cents on the dollar to men, even for doing the same job. So that's got to change. So if you're a man in a position of power, make sure that you're looking at that, because women still, and if you're a woman, ask for more, because we don't ask for it, and you need to ask for it, because you deserve it. So that's one thing. I think another way to be an ally is in a room, in a meeting room, our meetings need to change. Oh my goodness, they have to change. And so if you're dominating the conversation, or if you're seeing that someone else is not being invited to participate in the conversation that's female, make sure that they get heard. If you do contribute to the conversation, say yes and, versus challenging someone and saying no but. Say yes and, for everyone. It's collaborative, it's supportive. It's saying that your idea, I see you, I hear you, and I'm going to add on to the conversation versus challenging you and putting you down. So we need to lift each other up. I think that's some things we could do.
I'm so in love with all three of y'all. And Matt, you also modeled good allyship. What I heard you do was share your own reflection about your own privilege connected to power with your identities, and then you asked, how do you want me to show up? That is modeling good allyship. You said, what do I, as a white, heterosexual, cisgender, able-bodied man, do to show up as an ally? That is great modeling. And so for all of us, if we want to be an ally to people who have identities that are targeted, how do we show up as an ally? We do is say, how do you want me to show up? Which means I don't go and tell, Al, here's a good idea what you need to do as a man of color, because that's bullshit. What I need to do is say, how do you want me to show up? To Tamara, I'm going to say, what do you need from me? How is it best that I show up for communities who are African American? For Maria, how do you want me to show up? What do you need from me to be supportive for women? And I would share that with Tamara. Rather than speaking for communities or speaking over, ask, what do you need? How do you want me to show up?
Got a question over here.
So what started as a question, I guess, in my own mind has developed into more of a comment, kind of in reflection of what Matt said. And maybe you guys have thoughts on it also. The majority of the time that these conversation takes place, we are not in the room. There's not often, a an LGBT or a gay person in the room when gay men are being spoken about or gay women. There's not often people of color in the room when decisions are being made or conversations are taking place around people of color. And so I feel it's important to note that one of the best things you can do, Matt and others, is be a representative in that room, even when the population that may be affected is not there with you. Because we don't hear your lunchtime conversations, because they wouldn't have those conversations if we were at the table. And we're not on the golf course, and we're not at the dinner table. But to be an ally of ours is to say that even when someone is not there to be offended or affected, I will be that person who stands up to the people who are in the group and offers a different perspective. I was at a conference recently. I spoke on a panel for my alma mater at Georgetown University, and someone said, rather than calling people out, call them in. And finding ways that we, as people of all different ethnic backgrounds and colors and socioeconomic levels, can choose to be active participants in change and in solutions, as this panel has said, is really one of the best ways that you can be our allies, because you will more often be at tables that do not include us, as has been pointed out, than ones that do.
What's your name?
I'm Sasha Spencer Atwood. I'm with Tracktown USA.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your name.
Sasha Spencer Atwood.
Sasha, you're wonderful. Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? Please say your name and where you're from.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know we were looking at me. My name's Kai. I'm based in Portland. Not to turn the conversation away from these important person-to-person interactions, but I, as I'm sure lots of people in the room, am responsible in my professional life for content creation. And there's a whole language and reality of expectation that we put out into the world and certainly into Oregon as the way things look or the way people look or the way situations look. And I know I'm not ashamed to admit that I personally have been called out for not being as thoughtful as possible or as necessary about some content, whether it was a social post or an email, et cetera. And I am sure that, like many of you in the room, I find myself with very constrained resources and often have to work with what I have at hand, which is not necessarily what I want. And I'm just curious if either in your business experiences, the panelists, or Michael in your consulting work, if you've come across a protocol that's sort of a last check before things go out the door, or in the process of creation, et cetera, in language and imagery, in audience selection that may help to ensure that we're, as Oregonians, representing all of our residents and also speaking directly to both the people inside and outside who we hope to come visit and we welcome to come visit. And so they'll be reflected in those static materials, print, digital, et cetera.
That's a great question, Kai. I think we have to be careful about not tokenizing people and not creating something that doesn't exist. So, for example, I did some consulting work with a school, a public school in rural Oregon, and they put a bunch of pictures of students who were African American. And I did a tour of the school, and I didn't see one African American student, but I saw a lot of Latino students. And so I pulled the principal aside and I said, I'm confused because I see all these pictures of students who are African American, but I haven't seen one. And he goes, well, that was our attempt to say we're a diverse community. I said, right, but it's not true. It's actually false. And so now you've tokenized people, and now you've harmed the African American community, which means there's some repair work that needs to be done. What would it be like to take a picture with their permission of the Latino students that you have, which is more honest? And in the travel industry, how do you do outreach to communities of color that is authentic and not tokenize people? We have a lot of people who identify as First Nations people, and people who are First Nations people here in Oregon that don't feel safe in their own communities. How do we do outreach and say, what do you need from us? What would it look like? We'd like to include you in our materials, but we don't want to tokenize you. what do you need from us? What would it look like for you to be in our materials, and what would that look like for you? And let communities of color tell you how to do it.
From a business perspective also, I think it's important for you to take a look at your infrastructure and really take a serious look and say, are there any biases built into my to my business? We just had a really great exercise at the Jupiter where we're, again, looking at these job descriptions for these new positions, and we collected a series of different job descriptions. And as we're reading them, we're just looking at the number of people that would self-eliminate from ever applying for a position just because there are some hardcore biases. And what I mean by that, for example, is the whole housekeeping supervisor position, for example. One of those is always like previous experience required, type thing. But yet we know that we have a huge segment of the population that work in these jobs that don't apply for them because there is this barrier. So automatically I am eliminating the most qualified people from applying for these positions. So you have to take a look internally and be honest with what kind of company, what kind of organization are you building? Are you trying to build? What are your values? And I forgot who said it up here, but it's about not just talking the talk, but it's about really walking the walk and really looking at your business and saying, am I promoting the values that I really want to be associated with?
And I apologize. We were actually out of time, and it's my fault that we're over time. So I'm sorry we are over time. Can we please say a huge, huge thank you to Tamara, Al, and Maria.
You were right exactly on time. You're not a second over at all. Thank you. That was amazing. It's been very enjoyable for all of us to work with this panel the last few months. It was great to see it all come together. All right. I have a lot of information. If you've been to the conference before, you know this is the housekeeping where I tell you a lot of stuff, so I'm going to try to keep it simple. So next we have workshops. I think you've got it all down by now. We have 3 of them up here, right behind this room here, upstairs on this in this building, and we have 1 across the street at the Currents building, and that is Global Ready India. So make sure you're safe and walk on the path. I think we all got that by now. People have been busting other people, so just know there are lots of spies out there making sure that people are being safe. I've been getting lots of reports of people, so people are watching, so make sure you stay on the path. After our next set of workshops, we have a really nice long break. So we'll be downstairs with our exhibitors. We have some yummy food, some yummy beverages, but we also have our very first ever attendee appointments. So hopefully I have seen lots of people signing up for appointments, but if you missed all our emails or you couldn't figure out how to do it, it's not too late. You can go on your app is one way you can do it. So you would go on your app, you would go to My Schedule, and you click on the little plus sign at the top, and you can still make appointments. Or if you don't have the app and you don't want to hassle with that, just come on down to the Attendee Appointment Pavilion down in the exhibit hall. Even right when we're starting, we do have some appointments left. So you can come down and we'll just put you in an appointment right then and there. So we'll see you down there for that. Also at the break is now a perfect time to bid on the ODMO silent auctions. And Bill Cross wanted me to tell you they have a ton more items than last year. A ton of you were very generous bringing items. So go down and check those out. And of course, there's the regional baskets from OTTA. You can buy your tickets for those. I didn't even have to tell Timothy he would do that. Okay, so here's where all sorts of good information comes for our big night out at Mount Bachelor tonight. So the buses leave between 4:30 and 5:15. We'll be leaving at both River House Hotel and here at the River House Convention Center. You can go to whichever one you want, doesn't matter. We'll have lots of staff there getting you on the buses, so make it nice and easy. Reese from Mount Bachelor wanted to be here to give us a message, but of course he's up there setting up for us tonight, so he sent me a little message to read. He says, "We have a simple goal at Mount Bachelor to enhance people's lives and have fun doing it. I welcome all of you to join us tonight in that same spirit. We have an optional Central Oregon beverage tasting event along with appetizers at 7,700 feet elevation with a chairlift ride to get there and back. We'll have an ongoing party at our main lodge with music, food, fire, and tubing. It's in the mountains. It's colder up there. Come ready to play at an elevated Oregon experience. So, this is me now. Remember to dress warm. We've been reminding all of you, bring your winter clothes. This is playing at the mountain in the snow if you want. There's also lots of indoor activities if you're not really a snow, outdoor, cold person. The tubing hill is open, so I'm so psyched about that. And then for people, because a lot of people want to know these details, so I'm going to tell you a few more. The first bus leaves the mountain at 8 o'clock, so if you're super exhausted and you just want to get back to your room, you can go up there, eat, and come back on the first bus. The last buses are leaving around 9, and those buses will have the option of either going to the after party or coming back to the hotel, and they will be looping, so you'll have the option. You can change your mind. Just decide when you get on the bus. The after party is at a really cool place here in Bend called the Box Factory, and we are going to be going to the River Pig Saloon, the Immersion Brewing, and Atlas Cider. They're opening only for us because Monday nights are not really big late nights here, so just for us. If you stay out past 11:30, that's the last bus. The last buses are 11:30, and we do have people going through the bars, making sure we get you on those last buses. If you decide to stay, you can call a cab or Uber or a Lyft. And if you call Uber, there is a discount just for us in the app. Go to the ride sharing little icon, and you'll see a Central Oregon discount from Uber for us. And last but not least, keep looking for that bunny. No one's found the bunny yet, so keep looking on your thumb drives and come to the desk for that 2 nights at 5 Pine. And if you have any questions, because you can't remember all I just said, just come see us at registration. We'll answer all your questions this afternoon. So thank you. See you later.
I feel glorious.